Now, the Bank of England has warned that Britain may be facing the longest recession for 100 years, following an announcement that interest rates will be raised to 3%.
Taxpayers are facing the worst squeeze on real incomes since the Second World War, with analysis suggesting that the average household will be £800 poorer next year.
Joining us now is economics commentator Laurie Laird. Laurie, thank you for joining us. It seems that we're just sort of being told that there's no alternative but to sort of sleepwalk into a 2-year recession.
It's bad. It's not quite as bad as it appears. Yes, it will be quite potentially the longest recession we have ever seen, but it won't be the deepest. It won't be as extreme as what we saw during the 2008, the great financial crisis. And in fact, a couple of the Bank of England members who gave a press conference yesterday said that there's a lot of uncertainty amongst this, around this forecast. It may not be quite as bad as what we think. But I think the real thing to fixate on is the Bank of England did raise rates by a huge amount. They telegraphed this well. There was no surprise there. But the one thing that was surprising is they're saying we're getting to the top of this tightening cycle. We don't have too much further to go. And they essentially voiced the concern that this is going to be a recession and we can't continue to raise rates while the economy is slowing. So we're getting toward the end of this tightening cycle.
An interesting article today in the Eye, Paul Ward there saying, look, reform of the Bank of England, you know, everybody could be a bit to blame. We were talking about the cost of COVID, we were talking about Trussonomics, but also the bank is not beyond criticism. Too much power, hasn't really explained what it was doing, and it was behind the curve for a long period of time when really it should have been looking at the economy and where things were going.
Interesting, because the Bank of England started tightening rates well before the Federal Reserve in the U.S. did. They were a little bit slower to do it, but they were 6 months ahead of the Fed. This is an interesting one because central banks started here by saying, think back to post-pandemic, inflation's transitory. It's simply supply chains. This is the problem. Don't worry. Don't panic about this. Then it became, this is oil prices. This is energy prices. We can't affect the price of energy with interest rates. Don't panic. It'll come back down. We are now seeing central bankers say, ooh, maybe it's time for us to panic. And I think the one thing to be concerned about is a press conference that the head of the Federal Reserve gave a couple of days ago, Jerome Powell. And the Federal Reserve is sort of first amongst equals in world central banks. He said that we have very little data about inflation being this high in the modern era. That scared me. Over the summer, Jerome Powell said, I now understand how much I didn't understand about inflation. This is concerning. So we have central bankers following the old playbook, but it's not entirely clear that this playbook applies to this bout of inflation.
So we've got interest rates going up, which obviously is going to slow down the economy. We've got the Chancellor has got his autumn statement where we're being told it's going to hurt, is the front page of the Metro. Tax rises, which will damage the economy, spending cuts, which will slow down the economy. I mean, does Jeremy Hunt have to go down this path?
I'm so glad you asked, because Rishi Sunak has really pinned himself to fiscal probity. And when he was Chancellor, I was going to say way back when, actually not that long ago, he very much talked about fiscal probity. We can't outspend, we can't live beyond our means. This is a bad time to cut spending. To go into a recession and talk about cutting spending isn't a fantastic idea. These potential increases in capital gains tax, that falls on the people who are making the most. That is the sort of tax that makes sense in this environment. But cutting spending in a recession, I'm not sure that makes a great deal of sense. We all got this primer on economics when Liz Truss was around. We all learned what bond yields were. We learned a lot more about interest rates than we knew. But bond yields are below where they were on the 23rd of September. We can still borrow for 10 years at just over 3%. It seems to me that going into a recession is a time to borrow to make sure your most vulnerable in society are taken care of.